What do we call sexy? What do we call hot? And what is often then promoted as such, either on movies, billboards sometimes, sitcoms? What is called gorgeous? What is called beauty? What is called alternatively inner beauty? And what is called wealth, thus, when it comes to beauty as a form of wealth? You might even say, what is good art? Well, I'd like to frame what is sexy in terms of what's beauty in terms of, in turn, what is short-term expedient versus long-term expedient. In other words, I think the conventional view of what is beautiful, what is sexy, what is gorgeous, or, oh, she's such a hot babe, has a lot to do, yes, with the outward appearance. The outward appearance being not too tall, not too short, not too heavy, not too many wrinkles, and lots of vigor. But left out of all of this, it strikes me until today with great clarity, is one final component of what we call gorgeous, or a hunk, shall we say, in a male term. And that is availability. That is also desire to give it away, shall we speak, either to the highest bidder or everybody. Isn't that then, derogatorily speaking, why some people call those who indulge in this offered a lot a slut or a whore? Hate to use those terms. Whether said about it because of contempt, morally speaking, or non-acceptance, or out of jealousy even. Indeed, many a woman despairs after a certain point in time because they feel they're no longer sexy or beautiful because they have wrinkles alone. Or maybe their sex drive is reduced. Does that mean they're not beautiful? Maybe part of the problem is some women are not beautiful throughout their lives if they haven't worked on themselves, as one dating coach, by the way, has talked of. He stated his opinion, many people who have not worked on themselves are not good eligible partners in general, many women included. And so when the body goes as to the sexual component to offer, what's left? If there was nothing there to begin with in the values department, emotions, empathy department, intellect department, who knows? When the wrinkles, or the, shall we say, availability in terms of sex drive too departs, what's left? Despair in the women, accompanied by the realities that the women even today oftentimes make less money. So when we say somebody is gorgeous, or we say they're beautiful, and we're talking about a female, aren't we talking all too often about someone who, yes, has certain attributes, and maybe their body type is such that they have less anger, perhaps, in general. But what are the realities that maybe this beauty is really more a matter of availability, of the desire, willingness to hop in bed a new one every night, of course, men included. What if thus a handsome man, a hunk, an eligible bachelor, shall you say, is too the man who is able and willing to hop around, shall we say. And might I add too, without the empathy to go with it, just for the pleasure department aspect. This called then a one-night stand approach. Now others will say what's beautiful, maybe in a man who isn't offering or capable of offering the sexual department aspect, is money. Money can be beautiful in the sense of what it can bring you. So if sex is beautiful because it gives a great bang for the buck, short-term expedient manner of handling our fears, anger, and guilt, money can do the same thing and thus is called beautiful too, all too often. Hence, if you see an older man with a younger woman, or a heavy-set man with a, quote, gorgeous babe, the thought and talk of the town or in people's heads is, oh, he must have a lot of money alternatively, or be well connected with power sources. So that the money in turn can give a great bang for the buck, or what they call sometimes security. Hence too then the question, the old adage, marry for love or money. But of course, was there love to begin with? Maybe that's why there's a question to begin with. Was there even love there, or was there just someone capable of doing a lot of good deeds? Not high, shall we say, in understanding, soothing, and so on, patience, what have you. For in my book, there's a great difference between saying we're loving because we do things for people, do-gooders, if you will, or because we know how to bite our tongue and grimace too, versus being empathetic, versus being understanding, versus being tolerant of what some call the intolerable, the offensive. Yet a third ironic form of beauty, I think, too, is being well organized. Shall we say OCD beauty, in which in turn beauty is construed as being the ability to be well organized and keep out of trouble and make money. The beauty being thus the capacity to keep one's head above water financially, to be, quote, stable. Or as one woman told me, a good friend for many years, he was a good provider, but he had no empathy for me or my children. And in turn, she sought and obtained a, not divorce, but separation, his having been a Catholic, her not. So she had married him, he a professor, for the money-based beauty, not the physical beauty, shall we say, in terms, again, of the sexual component, the big bang for the buck there. But often in my book, also tied to money, is the OCD approach, the well-organized man or woman approach, the bean counter approach, that says, I can provide, and I can keep your head above water, I can keep you off of welfare, and so on, so that must be a great source of beauty. Especially in this day and age, when housing is so expensive in certain areas, especially urban centers, and you're otherwise called homeless or poverty-stricken, or you're in violation of a variety of vagrancy laws. And so beauty being the ability to make enough money in urban centers particularly, for those who wish to live there more and more these days, and do it legally, and what they call with respect, depending on who is defining the term. Otherwise, you might be called a countercultural or modern beatnik. Or, again, homeless because you are sleeping in an unconventional manner, car or otherwise. But with a note of humor, if you are living in a house and your wife has said go sleep on the sofa or in another bedroom, you're not considered bedroomless or homeless. But you are in a sense homeless because you're not sleeping in the bedroom or with your wife, let alone what is or isn't going on in the bed, or whether or not there's any conversation in general throughout the day too, or you're ever at home. So being, once again, sexually capable of offering the big bang for the buck, particularly to one gender to another, or being able to offer a lot of money, especially to people in urban areas, and given, yes, concerns about paying for housing in those centers legally, sleeping, shall we say, good schooling, good education, good medical care, and good old age care if you don't have 5 or more children, say, yes, that's a big issue. And then not just money, but being, quote, well organized as a form of beauty that you see on a person's stature in terms of what they drive, how well organized the interior of the car or vehicle is, what they wear. Is it, quote, well organized in terms of nattiness, some claim? Is it thus an OCD type way of life? That's considered beautiful, to be OCD, because of the money it will bring. And, of course, to keep yourself out of trouble by, quote, mouthing off, by being too, shall we say, by being too reactive. Beauty can also, fourthly, I think, be considered very high intelligence, but only if it is turned to money-making or power-making in that term. Beauty then applied, or high intelligence or what have you, applied to art, if called just creative, is not called beauty in my book. It may just be called a hobby or a starving artist, or even sheer folly and foolishness. Only when it can make money is it called beauty or art, high art. So I think, to recap and summarize, all of these forms of what we call beauty are short-term expediency, forms of beauty, or forms of escapism or way of life. If it tantalizes us in the short term sexually, it's called beautiful. If it provides us a lot of money for short-term measures, or it's a way of life of power, as I call it, that's external rather than internal, say, with regard, say, to acceptance, reframing things, patience, that's not called a form of beauty all too often, except in rarefied channels, religiously or in terms of spirituality. Only they defer that or define that as beauty. The rest call it folly. Indeed, there have been those who come to the point where they find the capacity to accept death without bitterness, or the capacity to forgive. Again, in my book, a matter of acceptance capacity, understanding capacity, moreover, to be very much the utmost achievement in life. And in general also to conquer certain addictions. But for most, sadly, and more, and in this country, that's called folly. We define beauty in terms of what gives a great bang for the buck, what gives short-term expediency, what gives pleasure now and pay later, or blame shift the results later under someone else, or excuse it away what happened to ourselves, until it all grinds to a halt or worse. I'll close then with 2 movies that have phraseologies very important, I think. Music of the Heart with Meryl Streep, when as a violin teacher in the Bronx, I believe it was, New York City, She told a gal student studying violin under her, wearing crutches, stand tall on the inside. And in The Horse Whisperer, Scarlett Johansson, a young gal who had lost part of one leg in a horse riding accident, finding it instrumental, the help of Robert Redford on a ranch, was it in Montana, to find a reason to live again and have joy, when at first she felt she was not beautiful after having lost that leg, and exclaiming, crying once to her mother, "Who's going to want me this way?" And I would say then, probably thinking, "I'm so ugly, unbeautiful." Namely, who's going to want to hop in bed with me now and have short-term pleasure now, if I'm losing and have in fact lost a leg? I might add, how many one-legged female prostitutes do you run into? They typically do have one leg, and they don't have crutches. I suppose otherwise many males might say, well, I'll just go buy a blow-up doll. I will recap and summarize too by saying, isn't that what being a good mother is about? Or a good leader? Isn't that what we call something stunning? Maybe rare. Isn't that what we called then a Lincoln or a Gandhi? Or in Russia, a Gorbachev? Isn't that the utmost maybe in beauty? The philosophers, ancient wise, might have called it ideal beauty, but isn't that then long-term expediency-based beauty? What lasts in the long term, what we look back upon in history and say was so wonderful. But at the time, we don't see it that way all too often. We don't praise it as such either. And we don't call it beautiful. It is obscured, it's in the background, it's not commented upon. It may be respected by some, but it certainly isn't talked of and understood very well, I believe. I think one reason I can see certain things about this is because my father had a PhD in English literature and helped me write early on. Talked about certain social issues in the home. And because I studied electrical engineering as my concentration at West Point, had field-based training handling at West Point also, and 4 years of mathematics part-time, and worked 10 hours a week at Berea College to pay off the tuition cost. And so I processed everything along with having spent 150 sessions in psychoanalysis in my 20s, 100 of such in California with 2 physicians total, delving into all of this, as well as an Eastern European upbringing, because my mother, for instance, was an immigrant, still is alive, 84, from Eastern Poland war-torn time, 1940. That's when she was a 2-year-old there. So that phrase, stand tall on the inside, be beautiful as to your inner strengths. Well, that's nice. Virtue, inner strength, soothing inner strength. But these are long-term strengths now, I call them. They don't give much bang for the buck early on. But without them in the long term, we regret not having them. We pay a huge price, and all too often we fail to see till it's too late what we didn't have or what some do have, and we blame shift it in many a way, shape, and fashion. What wasn't there. Thoughts here to consider when we talk of beauty. Isn't that then why we revere Abe Lincoln or Gandhi? Because physically speaking, they were not beautiful. They were not beautiful in the financial department nor physical department. But they sure were beautiful as to the long-term impact that they had. Not the short-term impact. Definitely not that. The long term is what was beautiful about these people, and in turn, what they accomplished upon a nation in the world. And I would say, perhaps, too, without them, we probably would have had a nuclear war by now already, and the world would not exist. So that, too, a form of beauty. Not just what they did for the world and their culture in general, but the fact that the world is even still here is, in my book, arguably due to people like this of great beauty that we don't call beauty. We call it great leadership. We don't call it beauty because it wasn't hopping in beds, and it didn't give short bang for the buck.